The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval training facility as a bus rumbled through the main gates. Inside, 23 fresh recruits sat nervously, their civilian clothes still carrying the scent of home. They had arrived at one of the country's most prestigious naval academies, a place where legends were made and careers were forged. Marcus Chen sat near the back, his jaw set with determination. At 22, he had dreamed of this moment since childhood. His father had been a naval officer, and now it was his turn to carry the family torch. Beside him sat his new friend, Jake Rodriguez, a tall young man from Texas who seemed born to wear a uniform. "Can you believe we're actually here?" Jake whispered, his eyes wide as he took in the sprawling campus through the window. Training grounds stretched as far as the eye could see, with obstacle courses, shooting ranges, and pristine barracks dotting the landscape. "Feels surreal," Marcus replied, gripping his duffel bag tighter. "My dad said the first week breaks most people." The bus pulled to a stop outside the main administration building. A stern-looking officer with a clipboard stood waiting, his posture so rigid he might have been carved from stone. The recruits filed out, forming a ragged line that would have made any drill sergeant weep. "Welcome to Naval Station Aurora," the officer barked. "I am Lieutenant Commander Hayes. For the next 16 weeks, this facility will be your home, your school, and your proving ground. Some of you will succeed. Many of you will not." Among the group was Sarah Mitchell, a stocky young woman with short blonde hair and a confident stride. She had been a star athlete in college and carried herself like someone who had never met a challenge she couldn't conquer. Next to her stood David Park, a quiet engineering graduate who had traded his calculator for combat boots. The recruits were marched to their barracks, a long building with rows of identical bunks. As they claimed their spaces, the nervous chatter grew louder. Stories were exchanged, backgrounds revealed, and quick friendships formed in the way they always do when strangers face uncertainty together. "I heard they wake us at 4 in the morning, Sarah said, unpacking her bag with military precision. "And the physical training is supposed to be brutal." "My cousin went through this 2 years ago," David added, adjusting his glasses. "He said the mental tests are worse than the physical ones. They want to see who breaks under pressure." The first 3 days passed in a blur of orientation, uniform distribution, and basic drills. The recruits learned to march in formation, to salute properly, and to address their superiors with the correct protocol. They were no longer individuals, but potential members of something greater than themselves. On the 4th morning, Lieutenant Commander Hayes made an announcement during breakfast. The mess hall fell silent as he spoke. "Today, you will be joined by an additional recruit. She was delayed due to administrative processing, but will be integrated into your unit immediately. I expect you to treat her as you would any other member of this company." The recruits exchanged glances. A latecomer was unusual, and already the speculation began. Why had she been delayed? Was there something special about her? Or had there been problems with her application? That afternoon, as the group returned from a grueling run through the obstacle course, they saw her for the first time. A young woman stood outside the barracks, a single duffel bag at her feet. She was small in stature, perhaps 5 feet 4 inches tall, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore standard civilian clothes and looked almost fragile compared to the recruits who had already begun developing the hardened appearance of military training. Emily Rivers appeared to be in her early 20s, with an unassuming presence that made her seem almost out of place. She had a quiet way of standing, with her hands clasped in front of her, and she observed the approaching group with calm, dark eyes. "That's her?" Jake muttered to Marcus. "She looks like she should be in a library, not a naval academy." Marcus said nothing, but he noticed something in her eyes, a steadiness that seemed unusual for someone about to enter the chaos of basic training. Lieutenant Commander Hayes emerged from the administration office and gestured for Emily to follow him. She picked up her bag and disappeared into the barracks to receive her bunk assignment and uniforms. By dinner time, Emily had changed into her training uniform and joined the others in the mess hall. She found a seat at the end of one of the long tables, quietly eating her meal while conversations swirled around her. Sarah Mitchell was the first to approach her. With the confidence of someone who had already established herself as a leader among the recruits, she slid her tray across from Emily. "You're the late addition," Sarah said, her tone friendly but measuring. I'm Sarah. That's quite an entrance, showing up after we've already been through Hell Week. Emily looked up and offered a small smile. Emily. Nice to meet you. Sorry about the timing. There were some papers that needed sorting out. What kind of papers take 4 days? Jake asked, having followed Sarah over with Marcus and David in tow. We all got processed in a day. Just administrative stuff, Emily replied, her voice soft but steady. Nothing exciting. The way she answered, polite but revealing nothing, struck Marcus as practiced. Most new recruits were nervous, eager to prove themselves, or at least to fit in. Emily seemed neither nervous nor particularly eager. She simply existed in her own calm space. Well, you've got some catching up to do, Sarah continued. We've already done the obstacle course 3 times, learned half the manual and been screamed at by every officer on this base. Hope you're a fast learner. I'll do my best, Emily said simply. Over the next few days, Emily integrated into the training schedule. She woke at 4 in the morning with everyone else, stood in formation, and participated in the physical drills. However, it quickly became apparent that she was struggling. During the morning runs, she fell behind, her shorter legs working overtime to keep pace with the longer strides of her fellow recruits. On the obstacle course, she hesitated at the high walls, clearly intimidated by the height. During strength training, she could barely complete the required push-ups and pull-ups. The instructors, to their credit, pushed her just as hard as everyone else. But among the recruits, whispers began to circulate. She can't keep up, one recruit named Tommy Barnes said during a break. Why did they even accept her? She's going to drag down our whole unit's scores. Maybe she's got connections, another suggested. Rich family or something. Pulled strings to get her in. Sarah watched Emily struggle through another set of exercises and shook her head. Whatever the reason, she doesn't belong here. This isn't a place for people who can't handle the pressure. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the talk but said nothing. He had his own performance to worry about. Naval training was designed to be overwhelming, and every recruit was fighting their own battles. By the end of the first week with Emily present, the mocking had begun in earnest. It started small, with eye rolls when she finished last in runs, with pointed sighs when she took too long on obstacles. But it escalated quickly. Hey, new girl, need a hand? Jake called out mockingly when Emily struggled to climb a rope during a training exercise. Maybe we should get you a stepladder. Laughter rippled through the group. Emily said nothing, her face reddening as she tried again and failed to make it more than a few feet up the rope. This is a naval academy, not a daycare, Sarah added, her earlier friendliness replaced with open disdain. If you can't hack it, maybe you should go home. The instructors, observing from a distance, did not intervene. Part of military training was learning to handle criticism and pressure from peers. They watched to see how Emily would respond. She responded by trying harder. Every time she fell, she got back up. Every time she finished last, she immediately asked what she could do to improve, but her determination only seemed to fuel more mockery. Look at her, still trying, Tommy laughed during a water break. It's almost sad. Like watching a puppy try to climb stairs. David Park, who had remained mostly quiet during the harassment, finally spoke up. Leave her alone, she's trying her best. Her best isn't good enough, Sarah shot back. In a real situation, weakness gets people killed. We have a right to know our unit is strong. That evening, as the recruits cleaned their equipment, Marcus found himself near Emily's bunk. She was methodically polishing her boots, her face expressionless. Don't let them get to you, Marcus said quietly. Everyone struggles with something here. Emily looked up at him, and for a moment, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not hurt, not anger, but something else he couldn't quite identify. I appreciate that, she said. But I'm fine. The way she said it made Marcus pause. She didn't sound defeated or discouraged. She sounded patient, like someone waiting for something. The second week brought new challenges. The recruits began combat training, learning basic hand-to-hand techniques and defensive maneuvers. This was where physical size and strength mattered most, and Emily found herself particularly outmatched. During sparring practice, she was paired with recruits who towered over her. She was knocked down repeatedly, her smaller frame no match for the weight and reach advantages of her opponents. Each time she hit the mat, The laughter grew louder. Maybe they'll assign you to a desk job, Jake taunted after watching her get thrown for the 5th time. You could sharpen pencils for the real sailors. Or serve coffee, Sarah added with a smirk. That seems more your speed, new girl. The nickname had stuck. New girl, said with such derision that it might as well have been an insult. Emily never corrected them, never asked to be called by her actual name. She simply absorbed the mockery and continued training. Lieutenant Commander Hayes watched all of this with an inscrutable expression. During a private meeting with his fellow instructors, questions were raised. Should we intervene? One instructor asked. The harassment is getting severe. Hayes shook his head slowly. She hasn't complained, and she's passing all the minimum requirements, even if barely. We let it play out. Do you know who she is? Another instructor asked carefully. I know exactly who she is, Hayes replied, which is why we're letting this play out. She clearly wants to be treated like every other recruit. We'll respect that. By the 3rd week, the mockery had reached its peak. The recruits had formed a tight bond, united partly by their shared experience and partly by their shared target. Emily had become the unit's punching bag, the person they could all feel superior to. During a particularly brutal training session, Emily failed to complete a timed run within the required parameters. As she crossed the finish line, gasping for breath, the entire group was forced to do extra push-ups as punishment for her failure. Thanks a lot, new girl, Tommy spat as he struggled through his 50th push-up. Really appreciate you being here. Maybe you should just quit, Sarah said, her arms shaking with exhaustion. Save us all the trouble. Emily completed her punishment push-ups in silence, her face flushed and her arms trembling. When they were finally released, she went straight to the barracks without speaking to anyone. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The cruelty had bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He had joined the Navy to be part of something honorable, but what they were doing to Emily felt wrong. She wasn't hurting anyone. She was just struggling, like many people did. He found David sitting outside the barracks, looking up at the stars. Can't sleep either? David asked. Thinking about Emily, Marcus admitted. We've been pretty harsh. David nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing. There's something about her, the way she takes it all. Most people would have broken by now, or at least fought back. She just keeps going. You think there's more to her story? Marcus asked. Everyone here has a story, David replied, but hers feels different. Did you notice the instructors never really push her the way they push us? They correct her, but there's something else there, like they're watching her for a different reason. Before Marcus could respond, the barracks door opened and Emily emerged. She was dressed in athletic gear, clearly intending to do extra training on her own time. She noticed the 2 men and paused. Couldn't sleep? She asked simply. Something like that, Marcus replied. You're going out for more training? Need to get faster on the obstacle course, Emily said. I'm holding everyone back. There was no self-pity in her voice, just a statement of fact. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at them. Thank you, she said quietly, both of you, for being decent. Before they could respond, she jogged off into the darkness toward the training grounds, leaving Marcus and David staring after her. The 4th week of training brought a new phase. The recruits would begin learning naval protocols, ship operations, and command structures. This meant more classroom time and less physical torture, which came as a relief to everyone, especially Emily. In the classroom, things shifted slightly. The lessons covered navigation, communications, maritime law, and the complex hierarchy of naval command. Instructors fired questions rapidly, expecting quick and accurate responses. Emily, who had been silent and struggling during physical training, suddenly became more visible. When an instructor asked about communication protocols during emergency situations, her hand went up. Rivers, the instructor called, reading from his roster, with some surprise. In an emergency situation, the commanding officer initiates a Priority 1 broadcast across all channels. Emily answered clearly. Simultaneously, the communications officer sends encrypted updates to Fleet Command with situation codes. If the commanding officer is incapacitated, command defaults to the executive officer, who must verify their assumption of command through Authentication Protocol 77 Alpha. The instructor blinked, clearly not expecting such a detailed answer. That's correct. Comprehensive, actually. Jake glanced at Marcus with raised eyebrows. That level of detail went beyond what they had covered in their manual. The pattern continued. When questions arose about complex navigation scenarios, about chain of command in unusual situations, about protocols that seemed obscure, Emily had answers. Not just basic answers, but thorough, nuanced responses that suggested deeper knowledge than a few weeks of training should provide. How does she know all this? Sarah muttered during a break. We've all had the same classes. Maybe she actually studies while we're sleeping, Tommy suggested, though he sounded uncertain. David, who sat near Emily during classroom sessions, noticed something else. The instructors had started directing more complex questions specifically at her, and there was a change in how they addressed her. Nothing obvious, but a subtle shift in tone, less like speaking to a struggling recruit and more like testing someone. During a particularly complex lesson about fleet operations, Commander Patricia Wells, a senior officer who rarely taught basic recruits, entered the classroom. She was known throughout the base as a no-nonsense strategist who had served on multiple deployments. Today we're discussing multi-vessel coordination, Commander Wells announced. I want you to consider this scenario. You're part of a carrier strike group operating in contested waters. Your destroyer detects multiple incoming threats. Your carrier has aircraft in the air. Your submarines are running silent. You have intelligence suggesting enemy vessels in the area, but no visual confirmation. Rivers, you're the tactical officer. What's your first move? The question was absurdly complex for recruits in their fourth week. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Emily, some with smirks, expecting her to fumble. Emily stood, as protocol demanded when answering a senior officer. She was quiet for only a moment, her eyes focused. First, I'd verify the threat data with our Aegis system and cross-reference with satellite intelligence if available, she began. Simultaneously, I'd recommend the carrier recall its outermost CAP to establish a tighter defensive perimeter. I'd have our sonar operators go active momentarily to force any nearby submarines to reveal their positions or go deep, buying us time. Then I'd recommend the strike group shift to Formation Delta 3, which provides optimal defensive coverage while maintaining offensive capability. I'd also initiate electronic warfare measures to jam any targeting systems and request immediate support from any allied vessels in range. Commander Wells watched her with an unreadable expression. And if the carrier commander disagrees with recalling the cap? Then, as tactical officer, I present my reasoning clearly, but ultimately follow the commander's decision, Emily replied. Chain of command exists for a reason. However, I would document my recommendation in the ship's log. Why document it? Because if my assessment was correct and the situation deteriorates, that documentation might save lives in future similar scenarios. And if I was wrong, it serves as a learning point for my own development. The classroom was dead silent. That wasn't an answer from a textbook. That was real operational thinking. Commander Wells nodded slowly. Acceptable response. Carry on. She left the room as abruptly as she had entered. The moment class was dismissed, the speculation exploded. What was that? Jake demanded, cornering Emily outside the classroom. How did you know all of that? That stuff isn't in our training manual. I studied ahead, Emily said simply, trying to move past him. Nobody studies that far ahead, Sarah interjected, blocking her path. You're talking about fleet operations like you've actually served on a ship. What's your deal, new girl? Emily's jaw tightened slightly. I just take studying seriously. Can I please get to the next training session? Marcus watched the exchange with growing curiosity. There was definitely something they weren't being told. The way the officers treated her, the depth of her knowledge, even the mysterious delay in her arrival. Nothing quite added up. That evening, David decided to do some digging. He had a friend in the administration office who owed him a favor. If Emily Rivers had an unusual background, there might be hints in her file. I can't give you her full file, his friend whispered during a quick meeting behind the supply shed, but I can tell you this. Her paperwork came through channels I've never seen before. High-level stuff. And there was a flag on her file that said something about observational integration, which is not standard terminology. What does that mean? David asked. No idea, but someone important is interested in how she's doing here. That's all I know. David shared this information with Marcus later that night. They sat on their bunks, speaking in low tones. So she's being watched, Marcus summarized. But why? And why go through basic training if she clearly already knows this stuff? Maybe she's testing something, David speculated. Or maybe she needs to prove she can handle the physical side before they move her to something else. Or maybe, Marcus said slowly, she's already something else. And this is some kind of cover. They both looked across the barracks to where Emily sat on her bunk, reading a manual by flashlight. She seemed completely absorbed, unaware of the speculation swirling around her. The 5th week brought their first significant evaluation. The recruits would be tested on everything they had learned, both physical and academic. Scores would determine their rankings and could influence their future assignments in the Navy. Everyone was nervous, including the recruits who had been performing well. These evaluations were designed to break people, to push them past their limits and see who could function under extreme pressure. The physical portion came first. The obstacle course had to be completed in under 10 minutes. Emily, who had been practicing alone nearly every night, managed to finish in 9 minutes and 47 seconds. It was her personal best, though still slower than most of the others. Still the slowest, Sarah commented loudly. At least you're consistently bad, new girl. But Emily's face showed no reaction. She simply moved to the next station. The combat evaluation was more challenging. Each recruit had to spar against 3 different opponents in succession. Emily, being the smallest, was at an obvious disadvantage. Her first 2 matches ended quickly with her on the mat. For her 3rd match, she was paired against Tommy Barnes, who outweighed her by at least 70 pounds. He grinned as they took their positions. "Try not to break, new girl," he said mockingly. What happened next shocked everyone watching. Tommy rushed forward aggressively, expecting an easy victory. But Emily didn't retreat or try to match his strength. Instead, she moved sideways at the last moment, using his momentum against him. Her hand struck precisely at a pressure point on his arm, and she used a leverage technique that sent him stumbling forward. Before he could recover, she had swept his legs and controlled his fall, so he landed hard but not dangerously on the mat. The entire thing took maybe 3 seconds. Tommy lay there, stunned. Emily helped him up immediately, her expression unchanged. "Good match," she said quietly. The instructor, a grizzled combat specialist named Chief Warrant Officer Briggs, watched with narrowed eyes. "Where did you learn that technique, Rivers?" "Self-defense classes, sir," Emily replied. "That wasn't basic self-defense," Briggs said. "That was close-quarters combat technique, advanced level." Emily said nothing, simply stood at attention. Briggs studied her for a long moment. "Dismissed. Next, pair up." The academic testing took place over 2 full days. Written examinations covered everything from navigation, mathematics, to maritime law. The questions were intentionally difficult, designed to test not just memory, but understanding and application. When the results were posted 3 days later, the recruits crowded around the board. Scores were listed by identification number, not name, but everyone quickly found their own. Marcus had scored well, ranking 5th overall in the combined evaluations. Sarah was 3rd, which she seemed pleased about. Jake was somewhere in the middle, as were most of the others. The person ranked 1st overall was number 047. Everyone scrambled to figure out whose number that was. David checked his own number against his roster list. 047 is Emily, he said quietly. The crowd turned as one to look at where Emily stood at the back of the group. She hadn't pushed forward to check the scores, seemingly unconcerned about the results. "That's impossible," Sarah said flatly. "She can barely complete the obstacle course." "Physical is only part of the score," Marcus pointed out. "The academic portion counts heavily too." Jake pushed through the crowd to confront Emily directly. "You cheated. There's no way you scored first." "I didn't cheat," Emily replied calmly. "Then explain it," Jake demanded. "Explain how someone who shows up late, who can't keep up physically, who we've all been carrying, suddenly ranks first." Before Emily could respond, Lieutenant Commander Hayes appeared. His timing was too perfect to be coincidental. He had clearly been waiting for this moment. "Recruit Rodriguez, step back," Hayes ordered. "All of you, return to your barracks. The scores stand as posted." But sir, Sarah protested, we deserve an explanation. Hayes's expression hardened. You deserve nothing except what you earn. Rivers earned the top score. If that bothers you, improve your own performance. Dismissed. The recruits filed back to the barracks, muttering and shooting dark looks at Emily. The mockery had changed tone. Now it was tinged with resentment and suspicion. She's got to be connected, someone said. Probably has family in the Admiralty or something. Rich girl playing at being a sailor, another agreed. Bet she's never actually struggled for anything in her life. Emily endured it all in silence, as she had endured everything else. But Marcus noticed something. There was still that patience in her eyes, that sense of someone waiting. The tension came to a head 2 days later during a combat training session. The recruits were practicing team tactics, working in pairs to navigate a training scenario. Emily was paired with Sarah, who made her displeasure obvious. Try to keep up, new girl, Sarah said coldly as they entered the simulation room. The scenario involved clearing a mock ship compartment of hostile targets while avoiding civilian markers. It required communication, coordination, and quick decision-making. Sarah charged ahead without waiting for Emily, making aggressive moves and ignoring basic tactical principles. Emily followed, trying to maintain proper coverage, but Sarah's recklessness created dangerous gaps in their formation. You're going to get us both killed in a real situation, Emily said quietly. Worry about yourself, Sarah snapped. I don't need advice from someone who probably bought her way into this place. They failed the scenario. When they exited the simulation room, the instructor's feedback was scathing. Mitchell, your aggression compromised the entire mission. Rivers, you failed to assert command authority when your partner's actions became dangerous. Both of you. Remedial training tomorrow at 0500. Sarah's face flushed with anger. As soon as the instructor left, she rounded on Emily. This is your fault, Sarah hissed. If you had kept up instead of hesitating, we would have succeeded. You broke formation, Emily replied, her voice still calm but with an edge now. You ignored protocols. That's why we failed. Don't you dare lecture me, Sarah said, stepping closer. You don't belong here. Everyone knows it. You're weak. You're slow. And the only reason you're still here is because of whatever strings your family pulled. Emily stood her ground, meeting Sarah's eyes. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Sarah spat. I know you're a fraud. Marcus stepped between them. Sarah, back off. This isn't helping anyone. Stay out of this, Chen, Sarah warned, but she did step back, shooting one more venomous look at Emily before walking away. That night, the barracks buzzed with tension. The recruits had split into factions. Most sided with Sarah, convinced that Emily was receiving preferential treatment. A small group, including Marcus and David, remained neutral or quietly sympathetic to Emily. The cohesion they had built over weeks was fracturing. Lieutenant Commander Hayes observed all of this from his office. He was reviewing reports when Commander Wells entered. It's getting ugly out there, Wells observed. Perhaps it's time to intervene. Soon, Hayes agreed. But not yet. She needs to handle this herself first. That's part of what she's here to prove. And if it gets physical, then we step in, Hayes said firmly. But I don't think it will. Rivers is more capable than any of them realize. They're certainly going to be surprised, Wells said with a slight smile. Admiral Kensington asked for an update. What should I tell him? Tell the Admiral his daughter is exceeding expectations, Hayes replied. Even if she won't thank us for the easy path we're not giving her. Wells nodded and left. Hayes returned to his reports, but his mind was on the young woman enduring mockery and isolation in the barracks. Emily Rivers had requested to go through training without any special treatment, without anyone knowing her background. She wanted to prove she could earn her place on merit alone. The Navy had agreed, but with conditions. She would be watched closely, tested thoroughly, and if she couldn't handle it, she would be pulled out regardless of her family name. So far, she had handled everything thrown at her with remarkable composure. But Hayes knew the real test was still coming. The recruits were approaching their 6th week, which meant they were about to face their first major field exercise. It would last 3 days, involve live fire drills, complex scenarios, and push everyone to their absolute limits. That would be when everything would come to a head. And that would be when Emily Rivers would have to make a choice about revealing who she really was. The morning of the field exercise arrived with dark clouds and a biting wind. The recruits assembled at 0400 hours, loaded with full combat gear and supplies for 3 days. They would be taken to a remote training area that simulated hostile territory, where they would face a series of escalating challenges. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood before them, his expression grave. This exercise will test everything you have learned. You will face simulated combat scenarios, environmental challenges, and situations that require quick thinking and teamwork. Your instructors will be observing, but we will not intervene except in cases of genuine danger. How you perform here will significantly impact your final evaluations and your future assignments. The recruits were divided into 4 squads of 5 to 6 members each. Emily found herself assigned to Squad 3, along with Marcus, Jake, Sarah, Tommy, and David. It was almost as if the instructors had deliberately put the most conflict-prone combination together. Sarah's face when she saw the assignments was a mixture of anger and resignation. "Perfect," she muttered. Stuck with dead weight for 3 days. They boarded transport trucks that took them 2 hours into the wilderness. The training ground was a sprawling area of rough terrain, abandoned buildings, and constructed obstacles. It looked like a war zone, which was exactly the point. Squad 3 was given their first objective: navigate 5 miles through difficult terrain to reach a designated checkpoint, where they would receive further instructions. They had 4 hours to complete the task. "I'll take point," Sarah announced immediately, not bothering to discuss it with the group. "Tommy, you're with me. The rest of you, try not to slow us down." Marcus exchanged glances with David. This was already starting poorly. A squad was supposed to function as a unit, with roles discussed and assigned based on strengths. Sarah was simply taking command through force of personality. They set out into the wilderness. The terrain was brutal, all steep hills, dense brush, and hidden obstacles. Within the first hour, they had to cross a frigid stream, climb a rocky slope, and navigate through a section of forest so thick it blocked out most of the sunlight. Emily, with her shorter legs and less physical conditioning, struggled to maintain the pace Sarah set. She fell behind several times, though she never asked them to slow down. Marcus found himself dropping back to help her over particularly difficult sections. "Leave her," Sarah called back. "She'll catch up or she won't." "We're supposed to stay together," Marcus argued. "That's basic tactical doctrine." "And she's supposed to keep up," Sarah shot back. "I'm not failing this exercise because of her." They reached the first checkpoint with 20 minutes to spare. An instructor waited there with their next objective sealed in an envelope. Sarah ripped it open and read aloud. "Scenario: your squad has been inserted behind enemy lines. You must reach and secure a high-value target building 3 miles northeast while avoiding or neutralizing simulated enemy patrols. You have until sunset. Rules of engagement are in effect. Paint rounds only." They had been issued training weapons that fired paint rounds instead of live ammunition. Hits from opposing forces would be marked clearly, and accumulated hits meant you were considered a casualty. "This is more serious," David observed. "They'll have instructors playing enemy forces, and they won't make it easy." "Then we move fast and smart," Sarah said. "Tommy and Jake, you're forward scouts. Chen, you cover our flank. Park, you navigate. And Rivers, you stay in the middle where you can't screw anything up." Emily said nothing, simply checking her weapon and adjusting her gear. Marcus noticed she handled the weapon with practiced familiarity, her movements efficient and sure. They moved out toward the objective. Within the first mile, they encountered their first enemy patrol. Jake spotted them first, 3 instructors in hostile force uniforms moving through the trees. "Contact. 11 o'clock, Jake whispered urgently. 3 hostiles. Sarah immediately prepared to engage. "We take them out. Jake, Tommy, with me, covering fire on my signal." "Wait," Emily said quietly. "There's a better way." "Nobody asked you," Sarah hissed. "If we engage, the sound will draw other patrols," Emily continued, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to go around. There's a ravine 30 meters to our right. We can use it for concealment and bypass them entirely." "And waste time," Sarah countered. "We engage now while we have surprise." "It's not about time. It's about completing the mission," Emily insisted. Unnecessary engagement puts the whole squad at risk. Sarah's face reddened with anger. I'm in command here, new girl. We're engaging. Anyone who doesn't follow orders can explain why to the instructors. Marcus felt torn. Emily's logic made sense, but Sarah was right that someone needed to make decisions. Even if they were wrong, hesitation could be worse than a bad choice. Sarah gave the signal and opened fire. The fight was brief but chaotic. They did eliminate the patrol, but not before Tommy took 2 paint hits and Jake took 1. According to the rules, they were now wounded and would be less effective. And worse, the sound of the engagement had indeed drawn attention. Within minutes, they heard whistles and movement in the forest around them. More enemy forces were converging on their position. Move, 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 Sarah shouted, leading them in a run toward the objective. They managed to evade immediate pursuit, but now they were scattered, breathing hard, and 2 members down. They regrouped in a small clearing, checking their situation. We should have gone around, David said quietly. Emily was right. We dealt with the threat, Sarah insisted, though she looked less certain now. Let's just get to the objective. The next 2 hours were grueling. They had to move carefully to avoid additional patrols while still making progress toward the target building. Emily, despite her physical struggles, proved valuable in spotting threats and suggesting routes. But Sarah continued to override her suggestions, determined to maintain control. They finally reached the target building as the sun began to set. It was an old warehouse that had been converted for training purposes. Their objective was to secure it and hold it until extraction, which would come at dawn. We set up defensive positions, Sarah ordered. Tommy, Jake, take the north windows. Marcus, south side. David, east. Rivers, you stay on the radio and monitor for updates. It was essentially a non-role, keeping Emily out of the way. Marcus saw the flash of frustration in Emily's eyes, but she simply nodded and took her position. Night fell, and with it came the cold. They ate their rations quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. The building offered shelter from the wind, but it was still freezing. They would have to maintain watch through the night in shifts. Around midnight, during Sarah's watch, disaster struck. An enemy patrol had quietly surrounded the building, waiting for the right moment. When they attacked, it came from 3 sides simultaneously, a coordinated assault that caught the squad completely off guard. Paint rounds shattered windows, hitting Tommy immediately. Jake returned fire but was quickly marked as hit. David, on the east side, never saw the attackers coming through a door they hadn't properly secured. Within seconds, only Sarah, Marcus, and Emily remained unmarked, and they were pinned down with hostile forces closing in from multiple directions. We're blown, Sarah shouted, panic creeping into her voice. What do we do? For the first time since arriving at the academy, Emily's voice cut through with absolute authority. Sarah, cover the north window, suppressing fire only. Marcus, with me. We're going to the roof. Something in her tone made them obey without question. Emily moved with sudden confidence, leading Marcus up a rickety staircase to the roof access. Once there, she quickly assessed the tactical situation. The positions of enemy forces visible from their elevated position. There, she pointed. They've left their command element exposed. 2 instructors coordinating from that position. If we mark them as hits, their entire assault loses cohesion. That's over 100 meters, Marcus protested. In the dark. I can make it, Emily said with quiet certainty. She dropped to a stable prone position, adjusted her weapon's sights, controlled her breathing, and fired twice in quick succession. Both rounds found their marks. The 2 instructors looked down at the paint splatter on their vests with surprised expressions. Without their coordination, the attacking force faltered. Emily immediately shifted targets, marking 2 more attackers before they could adapt. Her accuracy was remarkable, each shot deliberate and effective. Sarah, push forward now, Emily called down. East side, they're falling back. Sarah, stunned but responsive, moved as directed. Within 5 minutes, the surviving enemy forces withdrew, and Squad 3 had successfully defended the position. The instructors who had been marked came forward, acknowledging their hits. Well executed, one of them said, looking up at the roof where Emily and Marcus were descending. Particularly that counter-sniper work, textbook quality. As they regrouped inside the building, everyone stared at Emily. The transformation had been startling. The struggling recruit who could barely complete an obstacle course had just executed advanced tactical maneuvers and marksman-level shooting. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Jake demanded. "That wasn't beginner's luck." "And that tactical call," David added, "that was sophisticated threat assessment." Emily was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could see her weighing something in her mind. Finally, she reached into her jacket and pulled out something they hadn't seen her carry before. An identification card in a protective case. She handed it to Sarah, who was closest. Sarah looked at it, her eyes widening. The color drained from her face. "This is a mistake," Sarah said weakly. "This can't be real." "What is it?" Jake pressed, moving to look over Sarah's shoulder. When he saw it, he physically stepped back. Marcus took the ID next. The photograph was definitely Emily, but the rank insignia listed was Commander. Not recruit, not even lieutenant, full commander. And the clearance level was significantly above what any of them would achieve for years, if ever. But it was the name at the bottom that made everything click into place. Commander Emily Rivers, daughter of Admiral James Kensington, Chief of Naval Operations. "You're a commander?" Tommy said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're already a commissioned officer?" "I was," Emily said quietly. "I took a leave of absence to go through basic training. I wanted to understand what enlisted personnel and junior officers experience. My father thought I was crazy, but he eventually supported it. The condition was that I do it anonymously, with no special treatment." "The delay in your arrival," Marcus said, understanding dawning. "You were negotiating terms." Emily nodded. "The Navy wasn't happy about it, but I convinced them it was important. How can I command sailors if I don't understand their experience? How can I make decisions that affect their lives if I've never walked in their shoes?" "So you let us mock you," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "You let us call you weak, call you a fraud, while you were actually outranking all of us by miles." "I needed to see who you really were," Emily replied. "Not who you are when you think someone important is watching, but who you are when you think someone is beneath you. That tells me everything about your character." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Every cruel comment, every mocking laugh, every time they had dismissed or belittled her, she had been observing and judging them. "I would never have made it through the last few weeks without revealing myself," Emily continued. "Except for Marcus and David. You two treated me with basic decency even when everyone else didn't. That matters. That says something about the kind of sailors you'll be." She looked directly at Sarah. "You have skills, Sarah. You're strong, you're driven, and you have leadership potential. But you're also cruel when you think you can get away with it. You judge people's worth based on their weaknesses instead of seeing their whole person. That's not leadership, that's just bullying." Sarah looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Her face was a mixture of shame, anger, and humiliation. "And the rest of you," Emily's gaze swept across Jake and Tommy. "You followed her lead. You participated in the cruelty because it was easier than standing up for what was right. The military has a word for that. It's called moral cowardice." Tommy looked down at his boots. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but couldn't find words. "I don't expect you to like me," Emily said, "but I expect you to treat every person you serve with, regardless of their rank or ability, with basic human dignity. Because someday, you might be the one struggling, you might be the one who doesn't fit in, and how others treat you in that moment will define their character." The rest of the night passed in uncomfortable silence. The squad members took their watch shifts, but the easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by awkward shame and confusion. When dawn came and extraction arrived, Lieutenant Commander Hayes was waiting at the pickup point. He took one look at the squad's faces and Emily's expression and nodded slightly. "How did they perform, Commander Rivers?" he asked formally, acknowledging her rank openly now. "They completed the mission successfully," Emily replied, "though there's room for improvement in tactical decision-making and unit cohesion." Back at the base, word spread like wildfire. The struggling recruit was actually a commander. The new girl they had all mocked was the daughter of the Chief of Naval Operations. By lunchtime, everyone in the training facility knew. The remaining recruits didn't know how to act around Emily. Some avoided her entirely out of embarrassment. Others tried to apologize, though their words felt hollow after weeks of cruelty. A few, like Marcus and David, simply continued to treat her, as they always had, with respect and basic friendliness. Sarah struggled the most. As someone who prided herself on being a leader and a strong performer, the revelation that she had been so thoroughly wrong about Emily shattered her confidence. She approached Emily 3 days after they returned from the field exercise. "I owe you an apology," Sarah said, her voice stiff. "I was wrong about you. I was cruel, and I let my own insecurities make me treat you terribly." Emily studied her for a moment. "I appreciate the apology. But understand this. The problem wasn't that you were wrong about who I was. The problem was how you treated someone you thought was weaker than you. If I had actually been just a struggling recruit with no special background, would that have made your behavior acceptable?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, it wouldn't have." "That's what you need to work on," Emily said, not unkindly. "Real leadership isn't about dominating people you perceive as weak. It's about bringing out the best in everyone, regardless of their starting point." A week later, Commander Emily Rivers completed her observational training period. She gathered the recruits one final time to address them. "I'm returning to my regular duties," she told them. "You'll continue your training here, and some of you will go on to distinguished careers in the Navy. Some of you might even serve under my command someday." She paused, looking at each of them in turn. "What I learned here was valuable. I learned that even when people think no one important is watching, their true character shows through. I learned that physical strength and tactical knowledge aren't the only measures of a good sailor. Integrity, compassion, and moral courage matter just as much." Her eyes found Marcus and David. "I also learned that there are people who maintain their principles even when it's difficult. Those are the people I want serving beside me." After her speech, Emily shook hands with each recruit. When she reached Marcus, she said quietly, "You're going to make an excellent officer someday. Don't lose that instinct to do what's right, even when it's unpopular." To David, she said, "Your analytical mind and quiet strength are exactly what the Navy needs. Keep thinking critically and standing up for people." When she reached Sarah, there was a longer pause. "You have potential," Emily told her, "but you have a choice to make about what kind of leader you want to be. I hope you choose wisely." Emily left the training facility that afternoon, driven away in an official vehicle with commander insignia on the plates. The recruits watched her go, each processing the experience in their own way. In the weeks that followed, the story of Commander Rivers and her undercover training became legendary on the base. It was told and retold, with each version adding new details. But for the recruits who had actually been there, the lesson was deeply personal. Marcus never forgot what he learned. When he became an officer years later, he made it a point to treat every sailor in his command with respect, regardless of rank or ability. He remembered the small, quiet woman who had endured mockery with dignity and had taught them all a profound lesson about character. David carried the lesson into his own career as well, eventually becoming a respected instructor who emphasized both technical excellence and moral integrity to his students. He often told the story of Emily Rivers, though he never used her name, to illustrate the importance of treating all people with decency. Sarah's path was harder. The shame of how she had acted stayed with her, but it also changed her. She worked deliberately to become the kind of leader Emily had challenged her to be. It took years, but eventually, she developed a reputation as someone who was tough but fair, who pushed her sailors hard but never tore them down. She never forgot the lesson learned in those brutal weeks. Jake and Tommy had different trajectories. Jake eventually left the Navy after completing his initial service, the experience having taught him that military life wasn't for him. Tommy stayed but remained a follower, never quite developing the moral courage to stand against the crowd. As for Emily, she went on to a distinguished career. She commanded a destroyer, then a cruiser, and eventually became the youngest admiral in her generation. Those who served under her spoke of a leader who was brilliant and demanding, but also deeply committed to the welfare of her sailors. She never spoke publicly about her time going through basic training anonymously, but those who knew her well said it fundamentally shaped her approach to leadership. She understood what it felt like to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to be judged unfairly. And she used that understanding to build a command style that brought out the best in everyone who served with her. Years later, when Marcus attended a fleet conference as a lieutenant commander, he found himself in an elevator with Admiral Rivers. She was surrounded by aides and senior officers, all seeking her attention. But when she saw Marcus, she smiled with genuine warmth. "Marcus Chen," she said, dismissing her entourage with a wave. "I heard you made lieutenant commander. Congratulations." "Thank you, Admiral," Marcus replied, surprised she remembered him. "I learned from the best." "You learned from choosing to be decent when it wasn't popular," Emily corrected. "That was all you. How are the sailors under your command?" "I treat them the way I wish I had treated you from the beginning," Marcus said honestly. "With respect and recognition that everyone has value, regardless of how they might struggle at first." Emily nodded approvingly. "Then my few weeks of discomfort were worth it. That's exactly the kind of officer the Navy needs." As they parted ways, Marcus reflected on those strange weeks so many years ago. He had entered the Navy thinking leadership was about being the strongest, the fastest, the most confident. But a small, quiet woman who let herself be mocked and dismissed had taught him something far more important. Real strength wasn't about never struggling. It was about persevering with dignity when things were hard. Real leadership wasn't about dominating others. It was about bringing out their best selves. And real character was revealed not in how you treated those above you in rank or status, but in how you treated those you perceived as beneath you. The fresh recruits had mocked the new girl, thinking her weak and unworthy. But in the end, she had revealed herself as someone extraordinary, not because of her rank or her family name, but because of the character she had displayed every single day. She had faced their cruelty with patience, their dismissal with dignity, and their mockery with grace. And in doing so, she had taught them all a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. A lesson about humility, about character, and about the true meaning of strength. Not all teachers wear their authority openly. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from those we least expect, delivered in ways that change us forever. The story of Commander Emily Rivers became more than just a tale told in the barracks. It became a reminder that in the military, as in life, we are constantly being tested, not just in our skills and knowledge, but in our fundamental humanity. And how we treat others when we think no one important is watching reveals who we truly are. For Marcus, David, Sarah, and all the others who lived through those weeks, the lesson stayed with them. They carried it into their careers, into their commands, and into their lives. And whenever they faced a situation where someone struggled or didn't fit in, they remembered the small woman with the calm eyes who had stood among them, bearing witness to their character. They remembered, and they chose to be better. In the end, that was the greatest achievement of Commander Emily Rivers' undercover training. Not proving she could endure hardship, but inspiring others to choose decency over cruelty, compassion over judgment, and integrity over convenience. The Navy made them sailors, but Emily Rivers taught them to be better human beings, and that made all the difference.